Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the patch 6.1 Shaman Changes Guide. My name is Tuskeh, and in this video we are going to supplement the Elemental, Enhancement, and Restoration Shaman guides with the changes that have come in with patch 6.1. We'll only be covering what these changes mean for PvE, as I am not a PvPer, and me giving you advice on PvP would be a bad idea. We've received a few changes as the Shaman, both in general and on a spec-per-spec basis, so you can use the links at the top of the screen to jump between the various sections of this video at will. Now, let's get started. So, let's start with Elemental, the ranged spellcaster. We'll start with, in my opinion, the biggest change to the spec, Enhanced Chain Lightning. No longer does this increase the damage of your next earthquake depending on how many enemies your Chain Lightning or Lava Beam hits. Instead, if your Chain Lightning or Lava Beam hits 3 or more enemies, you will gain a buff called Enhanced Chain Lightning. This increases the damage of your next earthquake by 300%, and, most importantly, makes it instant cast. This is a fantastic change for AoE situations, and anything involving 3 or more enemies clumped together will see you keeping your earthquake down at all times. For 3 enemies, you can take advantage of this by keeping Flame Shock applied to all 3 of them, doing your single target rotation on 1, and replacing Lightning Bolt with Chain Lightning as your filler spell. Then, just add Earthquake to the rotation and use it on cooldown. The only downside to this is that our cleave damage, so our damage on 2 enemies, has been very minorly nerfed, but using Earthquake on 2 enemies isn't generally worth it in my opinion, so I'm not too worried about that. Next up, a few changes to our talents. The most important of these is, again in my opinion, Echo of the Elements. This talent has been redesigned and is no longer a proc that makes our next Lava Burst, Earthquake, or Frost Shock not incur its own cooldown. Instead, it simply grants Lava Burst and Earthquake 2 charges, and effects that reset the cooldown of the spell, such as Lava Surge, will instead just add 1 charge. This is absolutely fantastic. Being able to layer 2 Earthquakes on top of each other makes for some insane AoE damage. I've easily pushed my DPS on clumps of enemies over 100,000, sometimes closer to 150,000, and the extra Lava Burst charge means that it's easier than ever to spam more Lava Bursts without ever clipping or wasting them. I'd say that this talent is now in line with the other 2 in terms of damage. I prefer playing with it, but make sure you experiment. Elemental Mastery is still great for burst damage, and Ancestral Swiftness provides a good haste bonus. Next, Storm Elemental Totem. Its damage and healing has been increased by a flat amount of 30%, pushing it more in line with Elemental Fusion and Liquid Magma. This should make this talent much more attractive for fights that require a sudden burst of damage. Some examples of this include Ore Gorge's Phase 1, Beastlord Darmak's Final Phase, the Blast Furnace's Final Phase, and Blackhand's Final Phase. Those are just examples, and Storm Elemental should definitely be considered when you need that extra burst of damage in key situations. This change also means that your Storm Elemental does significantly more damage than your Fire Elemental, bumping it up in your priority of Elemental Totems. If you have taken Storm Elemental, make sure you use it on the pull instead of Fire Elemental, and then use Fire Elemental once your Storm Elemental has despawned. Next, a couple of smaller changes. Grounding Totem now protects both party and raid members, up from only party members. This is fantastic. There is no longer any excuse for you to not try to ground a whole bunch of enemy spells and raids. Experiment, 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 I say. Go forth and redirect enemy spells, my Shaman friends. And finally, Ancestral Guidance has been buffed. It now triggers from all damage and healing, including multi-strikes, instead of only direct damage and healing. You know what that means, right? Earthquake, Ancestral Guidance, healing numbers everywhere. Finally, your tier bonuses have been very slightly modified. The tier 17 2-piece bonus now increases our multi-strike damage by 1% per stack, down from 2%. That's not too big of a deal, it is only a very slight nerf. Our tier 17 4-piece bonus now requires us to consume 12 stacks of Lightning Shield to trigger it, rather than 15. That's just a nice little quality of life change. Neither of these are too big of a deal in my opinion, and they shouldn't change how you play. So that covers the changes to the Elemental Shaman. Let's move on now. Next up, the Enhancement Shaman. This is where things unfortunately get a little bit murky. The Enhancement Shaman hasn't seen any specific changes, and its button bloat still remains a problem. However, the changes made to the Shaman in general still apply here. First and foremost, the changes to Echo of the Elements. Just like before, this no longer causes a proc that makes your next Storm Strike, Lava Lash, or Fire Nova to not incur its own cooldown. Instead, these spells now have 2 charges. This means that you can double Fire Nova for even more AoE burst damage, and Storm Strike and Lava Lash can be cast even more frequently. This may help make up for the small moments where Enhancement doesn't have any buttons to press, but for Enhancement Shaman in high gear, this may not have been an issue. In fact, for Enhancement Shaman who are already feeling the button bloat, this change may only exacerbate the issue. I definitely suggest spending some time on a training dummy practicing how it feels, because if you can make this work without it bloating your button rotation too badly, then I'd say this talent is pretty interesting. Experiment with it, I say. Next up, the increase in damage to Storm Elemental Totem. It now deals 30% more damage and healing, making it even stronger for enhancement. Pairing this with Primal Elementalist makes your Storm Elemental a complete nightmare for your foes, and can help you significantly in single target fights. I would definitely suggest looking at Storm Elemental Totem for fights where Liquid Magma won't be seeing a lot of use on multiple targets. Examples include Gruul, Orgorger, Hansgar and Franzok, Flamebender Kagraz, Chromog, and maybe Blackhand. Naturally, this damage increase also means that Storm Elemental Totem is much better for dealing bursts of damage. Finally, a couple of smaller changes. Grounding Totem now affects every member of the raid rather than just your group, so using it in raids is an even better idea. Experiment with what you can redirect and help mitigate damage coming in on your raid. Redirecting a nasty spell from your tank to a Grounding Totem is a fantastic idea. Lastly, Ancestral Guidance is now activated from all forms of damage and healing, including multi-strikes, rather than just single target damage. This means that using it while AoEing with Fire Nova will net you in a large amount of healing for your team. Now, let's move on. Restoration. One of the strongest specs for the Shaman, the Restorative Healer has seen a couple of small quality of life changes. It's all good news, don't worry. First of all, Restorative Waters, one of your passive abilities that you probably didn't even know existed, has been buffed. In a nutshell, this passive ability increases all healing that you do, increasing your healing power above the other Shaman specs. However, it used to be 30% healing. As of patch 6.1, this has been increased to 40%. That is nothing but good news for the Restoration Shaman. You're now more effective in every way. That's great. Next up, Echo of the Elements. This talent really is the star of patch 6.1. This, instead of being a proc that makes your next Riptide, Purify Spirit, or Unleash Life not incur its own cooldown, gives Riptide and Unleash Life 2 charges. It no longer affects Purify Spirit, unfortunately, which might sound like a nerf, until you also realise that it now affects Spirit Link Totem. Yes, you now have 2 charges of Spirit Link Totem. This talent essentially gives your raid an extra cooldown and allows you to cast 2 Riptides or Unleash Lives in a row. That's just fantastic. Assuming you don't need huge bursts of healing with Elemental Mastery or really quick save your life heals with Ancestral Swiftness, Echo of the Elements should be your default choice. An extra raid cooldown is fantastic. Use it liberally to help your team survive those bursts of damage. Spirit Link Totem is one of the strongest survivability cooldowns in the game, and having 2 charges of it, oh goodness me, yes. Next up, a small change to Storm Elemental Totem. It deals 30% more damage and healing, making it a bit stronger for healing the raid. This isn't strong enough, in my opinion, for it to replace High Tide or Cloudburst Totem, but it is a bit better. Consider it a slightly more powerful healing stream totem that needs to be able to attack enemies to heal the raid, which isn't really worth it compared to the other talents. Try to remember that this exists though. It might see use if you can find a fight for it. Next up, a change to healer's damage. You should now be considering Glyph of Telluric Currents, which has been changed to increase the damage of your Flame Shock, Lava Burst, and Lightning Bolt by 100%, and to cause them to cost you no mana. This allows you to deal more damage when needed, which will be helpful in a lot of situations. Definitely consider picking up this glyph whenever you have to deal any kind of damage, because remember, every drop of damage counts in a fight, and if you hit harder and for free, this makes this even better for everyone. Finally, a couple of smaller general changes to the Shaman that also affect Restoration. Grounding Totem now protects both party and raid members, allowing you to redirect spells cast on your raid without being in the same group as them. This is fantastic, so make sure you mitigate damage with Grounding Totem as much as you can. Experiment. Any damage that you don't have to heal up because you redirected it with a Grounding Totem is great. And lastly, Ancestral Guidance. This now triggers from all healing and damage, including multi-strikes, not just direct healing and damage. This means that you can lay down a Healing Rain and a Cloudburst Totem, activate Ascendance, activate Ancestral Guidance, chain heal your ass off, and the results would be spectacular. Ancestral Guidance may see use for big bursts of damage where it's 100% essential that you have every drop of healing possible, but I'd still say it's not as helpful as doubling the strength of your healing stream totem, at least in my opinion. But for those big bursts, consider looking to Ancestral Guidance for that extra leg up as a healer. So those are all of the changes to the Shaman that I felt were worth discussing in patch 6.1. There are a couple of changes that I didn't mention, such as Frozen Power no longer activating Molten Earth, which is just a quality of life change mostly for PvP, and the PvP set bonuses for Restoration. Neither of these are pertinent for PvE, so I didn't include them. If you want to read the full patch notes, you can use the link in the description to do so. Overall, patch 6.1 is fantastic for all Shaman. Elemental has seen some pretty big changes that allow it to operate even better, and Restoration has grown stronger, both thanks to the new Echo of the Elements. Enhancements still need some attention in my opinion, as its button bloat is pretty bad right now, and it will only get worse with Echo of the Elements. That said though, I believe that patch 6.1 is a great patch, with a whole bunch of new features that are quite interesting. I look forward to exploring it more as the master of the elements. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and you found it helpful. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, or suggestions, you can contact me using the links in the description, or you can just leave a comment. I look forward to seeing what you folks think about patch 6.1. Let me know. As always, I offer my heartfelt thanks to my patrons who help support the channel, with special thanks today going out to Sebastian Dormel. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck in the world of Warcraft.